Hello, everybody. Model Man Frank here. Welcome to the broadcast. Just want to make sure I'm live here. Bear with me one moment. Hope everybody had a good Mother's Day weekend. And we are hope everybody had a great Mother's Day weekend. And you're still having a good Mother's Day weekend. You were able to spend time with your mother or your wife or girlfriend if you have a mother living in the house. We had a good time here in our home with my son visiting and so on. I wanted to send out a special thanks to everybody who has subscribed to the channel. If you're watching this on playback, please hit the like and share the video if you can, and hit the subscribe button and hit the little bell notification. It'll let you know when a video is available on my channel. Helps out with the algorithm. Also, if you'd like to support the channel here, you can go to Patreon and sign up for free. It's or you can, if you want to donate, you can, and support the channel that way. It'd be greatly appreciated. Helps me out a lot, and I can actually put together more special videos and content that we can have some fun talking about. Tonight's video, we're going to talk about the 747. I grew up in the 80s, and I flew on the 747 many times. My wife worked for Pan American at one point, and in her early airline career, and she flew on the 747 a couple of times. My father flew on the 747. We all did, our whole family. And it was known as the Queen of the Skies. To start off with, many probably don't really know how the 747 came about. And it's probably something you would never learn anywhere else. So what happened was, in 1963, the U.S. Air Force began to put out a study. They wanted to make an airplane. They wanted to have a cargo carrier to accommodate, to fly along with the with the C-141 Starlifter, which was actually one of the very first jet-powered cargo planes that was available in the U.S. military air command. They wanted an aircraft that was going to be large enough to carry troops and to be able to be used in other avenues. It was actually going to be known as the CX-4, not the 747. The 747 would later come out at a later time. The aircraft went through its paces because what happened was Boeing thought that if they came out with a military aircraft first, they would have money funded at that point. But things didn't go out well. I mean, experiments, they had envisioned the whole thing going on here, and it just didn't happen. Their envision was an aircraft with a gross weight of 600,000 pounds. So they weren't thinking, they were thinking, we did the same thing with the 707. We started off with the military contracts, and then later on we got into the airline business. Well, that didn't work out the way it was going, that it was happening. That didn't really happen. So what ended up happening was that the C5 Galaxy, which was competing at the time against Boeing for this contract, the C5A Galaxy ended up winning, and Lockheed ended up banging away with the C5A Galaxy. And since it had an overwing, could you imagine the 747 with a high wing? So Lockheed won that contract for the C5 Galaxy. But Boeing still went ahead. I mean, they were deeply disappointed in that, but they still went ahead and looked at other contracts. I mean, this is what, they still went ahead and were thinking, well, maybe we'll do something here. So Boeing still looked at other avenues that they could fit. So they went to a number of different airlines, and when that really, a lot of the different airlines expressed agreement that, yeah, we would be interested in buying an aircraft that could fit over 400 passengers on board, and we could fly longer distances with the aircraft. The project was reapprised under an airline contract. So the aircraft's name would be the 747, or Model 747. It was going to be a double-decker carrier, and it would be something that we would be able to put out. So Boeing waited. They had to be strategic in when they were going to do this. So Boeing waited until they got Pan Am money. Okay, Pan Am was going to sign on, and then next was Japan Airlines, and then Lufthansa and British Airways signed on to also get the aircraft. So with all that money, prospective money going to be coming in for this new project, they went ahead and built a new building to house this building of this massive aircraft. So early plans provided accommodations for 368 passengers, and the gross weight now was going to go higher because it's going to be carrying passengers to 625,000 pounds. And the resulting it would need a very large landing gear system. The landing gear system for this aircraft was going to be massive. It was going to need a number of bogies. They didn't really know what engine power plant, but they were going to offer with General Electric, Pratt & Whitney, or Rolls-Royce, depending on what the customer wanted, of course. And so at that point, they started building this massive manufacturing facility to be able to build this huge plane, 2 decks. So when Boeing actually went to the military, they had actually looked at basically what you see in that photo there is an aircraft carrier. That was one of their future visions that they were looking into doing. So the very first aircraft to roll out of the Boeing facility was going to be one of beauty. And the plane was going to be a revolutionary design. So Boeing went ahead and started building the aircraft. They already had firm orders from Pan Am, Japan Airlines, and so on. So the very first rollout of the aircraft was going to be coming. So they had this new manufacturing facility to build this plane, so they started banging them out. And when this happened, the very first 747 rolled out in the 1960s. In 1966, I'm sorry. Um, so 1966, the aircraft rolled out. And as you see in that photo there, it rolled out with a big fanfare. They had, if you look at old videos of the aircraft being rolled out, it had the tails of every aircraft, all the different companies that were going to purchase this beautiful plane. It was really a beautiful aircraft. Now, when Boeing was designing the 747, do you know that they had designed a double-deck aircraft exactly like the A380 of today? Airbus didn't just come up with that A380 out of the blue. They had to find out. Airbus got that design from the Boeing 747. They wanted something to compete. So when Boeing first designed the 747, they had looked at making a double-decker exactly like the A380. Exactly like it. But Boeing said, wait a second, you know what, that's going to be too big. We're going to have to, we want to make an aircraft that's going to fit in airports, okay, with existing infrastructure. If we make a double-decker, people are going to have to be changing things, and you're going to have to make, the weight is just going to be astronomical. So they decided to go ahead with the bubble nose, the high top deck, and that bubble protrusion on the top, and that would be like a first class or business class at that time. And when that came out, people were like, this is a huge plane. This is where the word jumbo jet came into play. The nickname Queen of the Skies didn't come until later on. And so they had already started building these planes. This was the first one to come out. And it was being built in a new factory. And it was going to be built. There was some 1,500 models built over the many years. So Pan Am was the very first ones to come out with this aircraft. And July 25th, I'm sorry, wrong date. The first flight was successfully completed in February of 1969. And then on 22 January 1970, Pan Am inaugurated the first service of the type, introducing it from New York to London. So in New York, from New York to London, you were going to be able to travel in the in a huge jumbo jet. Okay, the plane was literally a massive bird. Nothing like this had ever been conceived, and nothing like this had ever flown out of skies. And it was fanfare. Everybody wanted to see one of these up close, just like the A380 is as of today. So, seating arrangement for this aircraft, it was, I believe, 3, and then it had a center section, and then you had another 3, and then you had a bottom you had the first. So when you walked into the plane, all right, the first, you would walk in and you would be greeted by your flight attendant, and then if you went to your left was more like a business class. It was the first class cabin. And then if you had if you went to the right, if you were part of like a the coach class, you know, lower class, you you sat in the back behind curtains, and there was a lot of restrooms on board this plane. This plane was a flying hotel, basically. It was huge. It was for the times and thing. I mean, it was a big plane. No one really. Everybody looked at it like, wow, I can't believe that thing can actually fly. And so you had a center section. It was kind of nuts because if you were seated in that center section, if you had to use the restroom, you had to get everybody out of the way. But if it was a good, large family, I mean, you had all the seats in the middle, it was easy to do so. I think I only flew once in the center section, and that was to London. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I did not fly in the center section. I flew on the outer sections, and that was somewhere. I think we went to Argentina as a little kid. We flew on the close to the window seats, and it was from New York to Buenos Aires. My mother flew with me as a baby. My brother was, I think 6 or 7 years old. No, I'm sorry, I was like 2 years old, and then my brother's 2 years. My brother was almost 10. So, we flew all the way down to Buenos Aires, Argentina, and we flew on this aircraft on Pan Am, and as a little kid, I didn't really remember too much, but my brother does. My mother really, my father would remember even more so. He flew on the aircraft a lot, going overseas. This aircraft was used on long haul routes, like if you were going from LA to, let's say, Japan or Hawaii. You were used on this flight to go to Hawaii from LA. You were going to be going across the Pacific, across the Atlantic with this aircraft. You would be doing just the long haul routes that other aircraft could not do. So there were a lot of different models of this aircraft that were built for the times. The Roots of E knows it was 3-4-3 seating. So there are two aisles, as you can see in the box up here. It was two aisles on each side. I mean, if you were on a long haul flight and you really needed to get up and just walk around a bit, you could walk around in this plane. Many people did. So you would enter the plane, right? And if none of you have ever been on a 747, I'm sure some of you. I'm hoping that there was a pilot here that's watching this on playback. So you had the upper deck was where the the cockpit was. So when you were sitting in the plane and you were staring out from your cockpit view, you were actually looking down, and it was like you were on like a third-story building. It was a 3-story building high airplane. It was very tall. If you were at an airport when this airplane was there, especially back there in the 80s, you would see race cars being put inside, or someone bringing their car with them. It would be going in either a Pan Am plane or a British Airways plane. There's some video out there that you'll actually show a car going inside. I remember very distinctively when I was going from New York's JFK to Paris on Tower Air, which Tower Air actually operated some of these 747s. And the 747s they specifically operated were the old 100 and the 200 models from Air France. And so I sat in the very front. I was actually in first class on the Air France model, the 200 series model. There was the 747. There were quite a number of different models that were made. There was the 100, the 200, The 200 convertible, which would have a mixed seating of either would have passengers and or sleeper. I don't think they didn't have sleeper berths, but they had passengers, and you could actually fly cargo on board that aircraft. So there would probably be passengers in the front and cargo in the back, or another way around. Then there was the 200 freighter, which was completely set up for freighter. The nose would actually crack open just in front of the pilot's cockpit. It would open up, and that would be the freighter entrance. So you would be able to put freight inside the aircraft, and you would also have a door on the side. Some had a door on the side. I remember distinctively being in Miami International when I saw one that had the nose in the front and the cargo door in the back. That was the only time I ever saw that aircraft with that. Unless it was actually at a hangar. I think they were making a modification to it. They had the SP, which we'll talk about in just a moment. They had the 300 series, the 400 series, okay, and the Boeing 747-123, which is the carrier version for the space shuttle, which we'll talk about that in just a moment. The power plant for this aircraft was going to be either, again, Rolls-Royce, General Electric, or Pratt & Whitney. They would be 50,000 pound thrusts of motor. And on the Pratt & Whitney models, it was a JT9D7F whiskey turbofans. Maximum speed for this aircraft was 602, just shy of Mach 1. And you could fly at a cruising altitude of 45,000 feet. This plane, this is where the Queen of the Skies name came out. So, getting back to my story, I was getting on Tower Air, and if you look at the photo that I'm showing to you here, make it a little bigger here. So that's the way that the front seating. So you could either go upstairs through that little spiral staircase, and you would go up into the top deck, and that's where the entrance to the cockpit door would be. Or if you were in that seating in the front there, you would have like a little like that little table you would see right there in the middle. The aircraft that I was on didn't have that. It just had that seat. They had replaced that like ottoman type table thing with a chair, and I sat on that chair, and I'll never forget it. I got on board the plane, and everybody was getting situated. The plane had already, as the plane was taxiing, you could hear the brakes going off and there was a little bit of a smell. The smell was actually the brake hydraulic fluid. It would actually permeate but we took off, and we climbed out over the Atlantic and started clearing out and heading towards Paris, France. And everybody was getting ready to go to bed, and I couldn't get my chair. So it was you would sit back, and then a little thing would pop out so you could put your feet up and be able to fall asleep. Mine didn't work. And it was an old 200 series model. This was in 1995 when I flew on this plane in first class. And I couldn't get the seat open, so I used my garment bag to be able to prop my feet up, and I was able to fall asleep. I slept the whole night through, and when I woke up, we were just crossing over England, getting ready for landing into Paris, and that was where my brother would be picking up. I was going to the Paris Air Show for the very first time. It would be the first time for me to be in Paris, and on my way back, I was on that top deck. So I would go up with my garment bag in hand, went up the stairs, and I would be sitting in that top deck on Tower Air all the way back, and it was so you would basically be on the second floor, and yeah, it was the same seating arrangement that you see here. It was very large seats, and there was no center section. There was no center configuration for this aircraft on the second deck. So, like I was telling you, the 747 100 and 200. Very important note. The second 747 to ever come out. Which one do you think that went to? Did it go to Pan American? Because it was. Yes, it went to Pan American because they were the first ones. That aircraft was known as November 747 Papa Alpha. It first flew as Clipper America, and then it moved to it became Clipper Juan T. Tripp because Juan T. Tripp had just passed away. And when he did, the aircraft had a number of good flights with it. They had one instance where the aircraft got hijacked. There was a lot of hijackings that happened in the 1970s and 1980s. But there is a video online. If you type in Clipper Juan T. Tripp, there's a video online that shows the fate of the Juan T. Tripp set November 747 Papa Alpha. And it's not a good one. The aircraft went through a couple of different handlers and ended up being scrapped eventually, and ending up in the Far East, not flying. So it was kind of sad. After that, Boeing and Pan Am were cemented together. Pan Am bought a number of aircraft from Boeing, especially the 747s. One famously did not make it, took off from London. It was a Lockerbie bombing in 1989. 1988, I believe, or 1989. I can't remember. The aircraft flew across and blew off the front nose. There was also the KLM. So KLM did buy a bunch of 747s. There was the KLM Pan Am flight in Tenerife. Roots of E is talking about. And that was to this day, that is the worst aviation accident ever. There is good video online that you can watch. I'll put a link in the description box below that you can watch about that very accident. If you have not heard of it, you have to watch the video. A lot of people survived, but everybody on the KLM perished. It was an accident that didn't have to happen. It was a communication error and a pilot that was just in a hurry to go home. And it's sad what happened. That wasn't the end, but the Lockerbie bombing accident that happened, the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland, with the Clipper Mayfair, I believe it was the Made into the Skies, I believe, or Made into the Seas, was the one that sealed the fate for Pan Am, but didn't seal the fate for the 747. The 747 would continue to fly on. Northwest Airlines bought 747s, and they actually purchased a large amount of 747-400s, which were the 747 with the winglets. There is a gentleman that actually commented on my 757 video, left a really nice comment, and I do apologize. I cannot remember your handle name, but he corrected me in one aspect. The 747, the winglets at the end of the wings were not made for maximizing lift. It was actually meant for reducing drag, which in turn would maximize lift. It helped the aircraft reduce the drag and the vortices that would be coming off the wing, and so on. But thank you very much for that send out, and it was very, I do praise him for helping me out, figure that one out, because there's just so much stuff to remember, and I got a little noggin, and I can't remember it all. So the 747-400 series, that is correct, Trevor. As a cargo, for Air Indian operations from 1971 to 2021. That was a long operating time period. So Boeing was starting to bang out these planes. So 747s were coming out off the assembly line, and at this point, McDonnell Douglas came out with the DC-10 in the 1970s, 1980s. And at that time, the L-1011 was also coming out. So Boeing came up with an idea. What if they basically looked at the principle, they said, you know what? What would happen if we took a couple of plugs, almost half the plane, the center section, a little bit of the front and a little bit of the back of the 747 apart, and we shortened the body? So we shortened the body on the 747, and we come up with a smaller version of the 747. It would still have the double-decker version, but it would be a totally different airplane. Hence, the word 747 SP came out. The 747 SP, or Special Performance type aircraft, would be this new airplane that would come out flying. And it was basically a small version. It was a miniature version of the 747. The only difference, of course, would be that it would have a taller tail, but it would carry the same wings, the same engines, the same flight control system. The only big difference was the tail. This is the 747 SP. The reason you don't see a lot of them flying, there was only 45 of these built. 45 or 50. Pan American bought a couple, and then some other airline companies bought. Iran Air bought one or two. Good afternoon. Good evening, Peyton. How are you? They flew really well. It was a great plane. Korean Airlines had them. A lot of overseas carriers bought a couple, but only 45 of these planes came out. Pan American had one, and I actually have a model of one here. I'm going to kind of show you guys here. This is a model that I have. Yes, the tail's broken. I know that happened in a couple of moves. So this is the 747P SP like you see in the photo above. Okay, and I wanted to show you guys something very interesting. The tail on the 747 SP was much taller, minus the clip that's on my model. Okay, this is a model that I got from, I think it's Gemini Jets. Yeah, Gemini Jets put out this aircraft. And this one is the Clipper Merry Dreams or something like that. But this is a 747 SP. And you can actually see in the box up ahead, right over there, that it's basically a smaller version. So there is an aircraft. It started service with Pan Am, and it actually ended service with a couple of actually got into private hands and became private jets. One that's actually specifically that is flying, and I do believe, I'm not exactly sure, don't quote me on this, I do not know if the aircraft is still flying as of today, but it is an imaging aircraft with a telescope mounted on the side of it. The Sophia, I'm not exactly sure what Sophia means. I know it's an observation aircraft to look into the stars. And the door on the side of the aircraft, there's a door that opens and an optical lens comes out. And you can actually see in this photo, sorry about that, I'm blocking my face, but you can see this door pops out on the side of the aircraft, and then there's a telescope that comes out, and they're actually able, being that they're flying up into the stratosphere, 45,000 feet, between 45 and 46,000 feet, just around that time period. At nighttime, they're able to peer out into the star system, out into the Milky Way. And this aircraft flies for NASA. I do believe the aircraft is no longer flying for them. I'm not exactly sure on that. I got to check my calculations. I do believe maybe somebody down in the comment field down below would probably have that answer better than I would. But Sophie was able to find a lot of different secrets in the stratosphere and into the heavens, and do a little bit more than what the Hubble Space Telescope can only do so much, and the James Webb Telescope wasn't out yet. So James Webb Telescope, between Hubble and James Webb, there was a little bit of a gap. That's where the 747 SP came in. And with that telescope, they were able to peer more into the heavens with that aircraft. Another plane conversion of this aircraft was for NASA also. And that aircraft, so 1970s into the 80s, the 747 was already flying. The space shuttle hadn't flown yet when this aircraft had come out. And for them to be able to do the testing with the 747, the testing with the space shuttle, they were going to need a piggyback aircraft. And NASA really didn't know what to do. They wanted to find an aircraft that would be able to carry, would be big enough to carry the would be able to carry the space shuttle comfortably on its back, but they didn't want to build an aircraft. So the difference between the Russians and us, we actually used something that was already built. The Russians, they built the AN-225 or AN-224, AN-225. They built that aircraft specifically to carry the Buran, which was the Russian space shuttle. We, on the other hand, so NASA got a hold of an American Airlines. Yes, American Airlines was flying the 757. They found they just didn't have a real need for them, so they sold one to NASA, and NASA converted it to be able to carry the space shuttle. As you can see, they strengthened up they took all the seats out, added a couple more fuel tanks. They strengthened the body up. If you look at the top of the fuselage, you would see that they added stiffeners to be able to have that aircraft piggyback perfectly on the top of the aircraft. This photo is actually from the testing of the space shuttle that never went to space, the Enterprise. It would do its glide test. They did a number of glide tests with this aircraft. When they put the shuttle on there for the first time and they flew it, they had some buffeting going on in the back of the aircraft. They put that cowl on the back, but they found that really didn't do any, make a big difference. It just protected the engines. But thank you, the Roots of E, for that. Yes, it is the Stratospheric Observation Infrared Astronomy aircraft, and it's NASA German Space Agency partnership, and it was discontinued in 2022. Very sad, because it's a very beautiful airplane. Still would be great to see it flying. It was really cool on how they made that. I wish they were still flying it. Back to this. So that cowling that went over the over the space shuttle, they didn't really need that, but they still had it anyways. One of the videos I watched about this, and I read a book about it. I've got a great book on this subject. If you ever want to learn more about the space shuttle, this is a great book to find. It's about the space shuttle, and it's the history of developing the National Space Transport System, and it's by Dennis R. Jenkins. If you ever want to find this book, you can probably find it. I don't know if they're still printing it, but you could probably find it on Amazon or on eBay, maybe on a used or one of the thrift bookstores online. Very good book, has a lot of good information in it. Books are better than Wikipedia. Just saying that, okay? Most of the stuff that you find on Wikipedia would probably be wrong, but this book has a lot of good information and has a lot of good drawings in it. So this is a book I highly recommend. So, the 747 space shuttle. So the space shuttle would leave a lot of that vortexing or the drag from. So they built that cowling to go over the back to try and reduce it, and they found that still they were having buffing. So they put the twin T-tail on the back, and it solved the problem. It stopped doing that buffeting in the back. They didn't really have to do any modifications to the bogies on the bottom. So the landing gear system, everything else is still the stock 747. The interior was not, it was upgraded over time to, but this is a 747-100 model, okay? And it flew with the space shuttle all the way until the last flights in 2011. This 747 transport system for the space shuttle is now on display. I believe it's in the Pima Museum. One of them is in the Pima Museum. The other one I think is in Everett, Washington. So the next, I'm going to show you one more image here of the 747 matted. If you have never seen the way it would actually fly, I remember there was a time that what happened was the shuttle was heading back. Really cool story. The shuttle was heading back to Cape Canaveral, and it couldn't land in Cape Canaveral, so they had to land it at Tampa International. We were living in Clearwater at the time, and the aircraft had to come in to land. So instead of going, I think they made an exception to it. They couldn't land at Tampa International, so they set up to land it at MacDill Air Force Base in the Tampa Bay area. And the aircraft actually landed there with the space shuttle. I believe it was Challenger. No, it was Columbia. It was Columbia. They had to land the aircraft there. And the aircraft stayed on the ground for a little while. But this is what the shuttle... Eventually, the 747 was taken off. The American airline colors were taken off the aircraft. And that's it. The 747 got the NASA white with gray coloring on it. But that's what the shuttle looked like after that, with the whenever it was being transported from Edwards Air Force Base to Cape Canaveral in Florida. It would be, the motors would be shrouded, and it would always fly with the 747 piggyback. Side note here, that piggyback system was developed by the Germans. True story. It was developed by the Germans and also the Russians. So that's that little bit of tidbit of information. If you want to look that up, that is how that is. The next aircraft we're going to talk about with the 747 is the 747, like I said, went through many derivatives. The 400 model of the 747, which was the 747-400, came along with the winglets. So when the 400 series came out, they were going to be going from a very cluttered interior. So when the 747 first came out, you had the captain, the first officer, an engineer on different routes you either had a extra pilot, an extra first officer, or extra cabin crew that would fly on the plane, and they would do a transition depending on the airline. And then, so you had, as you can see here, you would see the cockpit in one seat, the first officer in the right, the captain in the left, first officer in the right, and just behind the co-pilot or the first officer would be the engineer, and he would be monitoring, of course, all the engines on the display. This is what a cockpit of a 747 100 and 200 and the 300 series looked like. Come now into the 747 400 series, which I've got a model of it here. This is Virgin Atlantic. What was changing? This hump. So we were going from this hump to this hump. And it was going to be a little bit bigger aircraft, with the hump on the Queen of the Skies getting a little bit bigger. So, and also you would get winglets, wingtips on each aircraft. Bogies would stay the same. Motor size would pretty much stay the same. But you were getting a little bit of a longer aircraft, and you were getting an updated cockpit. So, the 747 was going into the next generation. Of course, you had to make changes because computer age was really steamrolling there. And with that going on, of course, the cockpit had to change. You were no longer going to have the need for... I know on some airlines they kept the engineering station, but on many of the U.S. carriers that were going to be flying, you would only have two pilots in the front, just like the 737, just like the 757, and the 767. So the two pilot system. Also, you were getting glass cockpit meaning you were getting LCD screens in the front, doing multiple different, showing you multiple different variations of instrumentation and things like that, your GPS and so on and so forth. Also, the cockpit interior changed the color. They went to like almost like it looks like a very like coffee style brown from that blue color that was inside. They thought that coloring would be more toned and better for the pilots. So you were still sitting up way high, but again, the turtle deck also changed, and the aircraft would be a little bit longer, with that second floor being pushed out a little bit more. So that second floor was actually becoming a different class on many carriers. Many carriers were actually going to be having business or sleeper class. So you would have a first class, and then you had business class. So on the first floor, come in through. If you're in the nose section and just behind the nose section into the very first class, that whole bottom first class area would be just first class. And then if you were a part of the sleeper class, you would be sleeping up top, or business class, where you would get like a little table and everything like that, and you would get that. The 747 has changed the way we do business in this country, and changed the way we do business in the world. It was a revolutionary plane for its time. It was the first jumbo jet. It revolutionized the way people traveled. Okay? No longer was it a flight for, flying was not just for the uber rich anymore. The 747 opened the airways to the masses. Everybody wanted to be on, it could get around the globe on a 747. As we went into 2000 and into the new millennium, We now the 747 is starting to be retired. The A380 is taking over many of its routes, but soon enough, the 747 will be replaced completely. You will not see 747s in the air. And it's kind of sad that's going to happen. But what are we going to do? There's markets are changing, and the future of flight is changing. So what has happened is that, I mean, let's face facts here. I mean, the plane has gone full circle, if you want to really see it this way. It started off as a vision to be a troop carrier, and it was turned into a passenger airliner. Pan Am inaugurated the service and brought flight to the masses. My wife took 747 to Hawaii. I flew on the 747 400. I think it was a 100 or 200 series down to Argentina. I flew it to Paris, and I flew it. You saw the aircraft at every major airport you ever went to. If you were at JFK, you would see the 747 there. You would see it in all the different colors. Cathay Pacific used to fly. Cathay Pacific actually had a flight that would go from LA nonstop all the way to the Orient to Singapore. That's a long flight. Now I think they even have one that goes from Chicago O'Hare to Singapore. And the last version of the 747 is the one that I'm showing you right now. Is the 747-800. The last of the 747s. The last model that came out was a freighter version of the 747-800. Bigger motors. I think some of them are using the GE90 engine. Bigger motors, more revolutionary wing. The wing kind of slopes out at the tips. A longer fuselage, as you can see there. And bogie wheels haven't changed. The weight capacity has gone up a little bit, but with new technologies and new epoxies and new aluminums and carbon fiber has lowered that weight, still down to around the 600,000, almost 700,000 mark with full fuel on board. What you're going to see now flying as a 747, as many as the passenger versions are going to be phased out, will be the 747 freighters. A lot of these passenger versions of the 747 will go away, and there'll be cargo carrying cars. Remember the Mira, the AN 224, 225, the Ukrainian Antonov was destroyed. So that can't really do much of the work that this aircraft can do. So it's times are changing. Eventually the A380 will disappear also. No longer will we see 747s or jumbo jets, as they call them, gracing our skies. The queen of the skies has got to disappear because of fuel economy and changing markets. This aircraft was and will always be dear to my heart, and I'll never forget flying her. I hope maybe someday I do get a chance to fly at least one more time on her. Anybody that has ever flown on it has always, you kind of feel sad when you get off the plane, because it's just one of those planes that's just really is remarkable. This was a plane that you would get a full meal service If you were on a long distance flight, some flights would get breakfast and lunch, or lunch and dinner. You would get some flights. You probably get breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Um, it anybody that goes to an airport, I mean, even if you go and you look online, there's a free a live video feed of LAX. Anytime there's a 747 come in, cameras on, because it is the queen of the skies, more so than the A380. I'm sorry, but I know there's a lot of aviation geeks out there love this A380. I think it looks ugly. I really do. I just don't like it. It's just a weird looking plane, and you just can't imagine that the 747 would have been that airplane. And I'm glad Boeing decided against building that plane. And you know what? They knew, they foresaw, but Airbus was like, yeah, we're going to build that thing. And Airbus thought they were going to build hundreds of them. It really didn't come to pass. The only real purchasers of the aircraft were British Airways, I think, bought a couple of them. I don't think Air France bought any. Who else? Qatar Airlines, Emirates, Korean Airlines flew them. You know? Oh, yeah, you're right. Norm Garza, you're correct. They were going to extend it to nearly 300 feet. That would have been a huge plane. But they saw the writing on the wall. They knew that that wasn't going to happen. They really did. I mean, they knew that the market was going to change eventually. You already had the A340-600 out, and the only big purchaser of the A340-600 was Virgin Atlantic. You know? 4-engine planes were not going to be part of the new millennium going forward after 2030. I think by 2030, we'll already start to see the passenger version of the 7. Before the end of this decade, the 747 will disappear as a passenger aircraft. You'll still see it as a cargo version. Atlas Air still flies it. So does Cathay, Air China. Not DHL. UPS still flies it. FedEx, not so much. FedEx doesn't fly them. But you will see this plane as a passenger carrying aircraft disappear. The one that actually will probably fly on and after this aircraft is going to be the last 747 is going to be, I believe, technically speaking, the 747-400 as a passenger service will be, 747 as 800 as a passenger service aircraft will disappear, but it'll still live on as a presidential aircraft. Yes, the presidential aircraft, the very first one that came out was the 747-200 and 300 series, was Air Force One. I believe she was a 200 or a 300 series. I'm not exactly sure. So the last one will be the presidential VP Air Force One. I'm not exactly sure what the call signs will be. They're still classified. And that'll be the last of the 747s to fly or to be able to be used as a flying service. So that's really about it of what I can remember of the 747 and going down memory lane with me with the 747. I know there's a lot more details out there. I'm going to try and share some photos of cockpit seating and some things that I see of 747s. Real important. If you guys can, go over to Patreon, sign up for it. Like I said, you can. There are some pictures that I have on there that you have to become a member. If you decide to become a member, it's greatly appreciated. There, you and I can have a conversation. We can actually have talk and dialect, and I would love to hear from y'all. Here, you can also send, make a make a comment in the videos, in the comment section down below, also about future. Next week's podcast is going to be a little bit of a mix. I think next week we're going to talk about the 767. That is a revolutionary aircraft in its own right because the design of the 767 led to the 777. So we're going to talk about the 767 and then the 777. And that will be the end of the Boeing series. We're going to, next after that, we'll be talking about Lockheed's only airliner that they ever built. I'm sorry. Only jet airliner that they ever built will be the L-1011, and that will be the week after next. So, but I really would like it if you can, hit the thumbs up button. It helps me out a great deal. And share the video. It helps me out even more. And I want to say thank you very, very much to everybody that joined in our conversation tonight. Trevor, Norm, the Roots of E, and CP Chase Gaming. CP, thank you very much for joining tonight. And everybody else that was out there watching us. It really means a lot that you join us on these podcasts. Again, share the video. If you want to join Patreon, I believe it is a free. There are some things that I put on there. And I don't have a Facebook page. I don't have Twitter or X, whatever the heck it's called. I'm not on Reddit. All right? You can join there, and I will post all my photos. I take a lot of pictures, and I like to talk about different things, and I'll put those things there. And some links also. In terms of model airplanes, you can build 747s as models. Revell makes a kit, Minicraft. There's a lot of plastic model kits out there. There's one guy online that I know has the plans to build a 747. If you want to make one into an EDF, follow his channel. His name is Julius. He's down in Indonesia. Really nice guy. I'll put a link to his channel down below and a link to he's got a whole video series on how to build a 747-400. And it is really cool. Just watch all of his videos. He builds the thing, but then I'm not going to give away the end. Just watch his videos. It's really cool how he builds it. And but again, thank you very much, everybody, for watching tonight and joining in. And again, if you're watching this on playback, please hit the thumbs up button. Leave a comment in the comment section. Please be respectful. And number 2, if you're not a subscriber, please hit the subscribe and hit the bell icon so you'll know when the next video is coming out. Again, have a great night. Have a good week. And we'll see you guys next Sunday. Model Man Frank out.